the overhead I have here, please?
Yes, we need the overhead, please.
Thank you so much. I'd like to address the issue of sovereign immunity because I see a lot of problems coming up with
We'll need
Greg.
to zoom in on that.
And before I get to that, I want to point out that you scheduled a special meeting. GRU rambled on from 5 p.m. to 9 p.m. They would have rambled on to 10 p.m. if you hadn't interrupted them. That's why we're going to finish up tonight. We had a chorus of doubt coming from our charter officers who got the same measly amount of time citizens got, 3 to 5 minutes. We need to change that. We know that GRU thinks this is a good deal at any price, but our city attorney, our city manager, our auditor doesn't see it that way. And we need to let them be heard loud and clear. Sovereign immunity, limited for torts, and a few other features. It specifically applies to municipalities, no punitive damages, and read this. Subject to the provisions of this section, any state agent subdivision shall have a right to appeal any award, compromise, settlement, or determination to the court of appropriate jurisdictions. That $50 million claim was dead on arrival and no one told you about it. So I asked, well, we have a limited waiver for torts. How could you have any suit in contract? That's because, according to this Florida Senate report that I've showed you, in 1984 there was a court case, Pan Am Tobacco Corporation, where the court carved out an exception for contract disputes with no caps. Well, you know what? The Republican legislature doesn't like the courts to legislate. I went to the mailbox today and I found out there is a litany of new statutes governing public contracting. It's very complicated. I've shared it with our very able city attorney. But I want to point out something to you. You didn't really let her talk long enough. But there is a specific law that contemplates public-private partnerships, which is this new company thing. It specifically contemplates it. And it's going to lay out a framework to do this kind of thing across a broader spectrum than Ms. Sally outlined, contrary to the apparent provisions of the Florida Constitution. But let me read this last sentence to you. And I'm just looking at the article. I didn't do the legal research. Finally, the law specifically states that sovereign immunity is not waived when it comes to public contracting. The way I read this, if this applies to the GREC contract, we could breach the contract and have no recourse in the courts. They could go get a $1 billion judgment from some arbitrator, but we would be immune to it. We need to have our legal department look at how these laws are going to impact this contract which we're dealing with. Florida Transparency Act.
We're talking about the contract later.
I'm talking about the change in the laws surrounding the contract.
Oh.
I'm not talking about the contract. I'm talking about the legal environment that this contract lives in.
Okay.
Okay.
Gotcha.
Now, the idea is we have to buy the plant to get it out of the fuel adjustment charge. There is nothing at all.
We're actually talking about an item we're taking up in just a few minutes.
I'm talking about the legal framework that we're operating in.
Well, but you're talking about the item, Joe.
No, I'm not. There's nothing in the statute that says you must take a purchase power agreement through the fuel adjustment charge. The statute says that when the utility buys the fuel, they have to separately state it and they cannot tax it. It's sort of like a practice to ram it through the fuel adjustment charge. But right now, just like you arbitrarily set the millage, you could say, don't put it through the fuel adjustment charge. Okay. We're just going to build it into the base rates. We have that right without buying the plant. We don't have to send the contract through the fuel adjustment charge. We could put some of it on this group, some of it on that group, and on the tax, the county would be able to tax it also if you put it through the base rates. You can exempt up to the first 500 kilowatt hours, and the 10% tax is a cap. You can have any level of tax, and Hunzinger was telling you about that. You have control over the tax. You don't have to tax it. You can tax it any way you want. But you don't have to buy the plant to get it out of the fuel adjustment charge. All right. That's a very, very important point in terms of legalities. And finally, I want to show you this. I asked for GRU to notify us, the owners, the bosses, about this new gas rate. And I got this letter dated September 23rd saying they'll take up to 7 days to process it. The rate takes effect October 1st. So you better not dilly-dally around here. But this is not really very informative. They basically claim that, the saving is $10 a month at 50 therms, but what they don't mention is this $35 hiked up to $40. So it really understates your savings by $5 a month. They don't point out that you have to average less than 163.9 therms to get the savings. And this number right here is an outside firm that's taking the calls. This is not a GRU number. This is an outside contractor. I would ask this commission to ask GRU how many people would save money under this new rate, how many people have signed up for this new rate, and it takes that $1.5 million in advertising money and show people how to navigate the rate structure to maximize the savings you have made available to them. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, Commission. Diego Ibanez, owner of Emiliano's Cafe, 28 years in downtown, president of the Downtown Owners and Tenants Association, and vice president of restaurants for the Florida Restaurant Lodging Association. I do not want to speak about the last agenda item this evening, only that we ask that it be moved to a future meeting and an earlier part of the agenda. This evening it coincides with our busiest day part for half the stakeholders involved in that agenda item, and we don't think that we will be fairly represented, and so we ask that you indulge us that, and we
Talking
can
about
have
the
a
special event permit food truck sales?
Absolutely.
You'd want that moved to a future meeting?
To a future meeting on the early part of the agenda rather than the evening portion of the agenda, so that we can all be present.
I believe planning board petitions have to be heard in the evening, but we might want to ask Michelle about that.
Yeah. Well, first I'd ask if we as a board are comfortable moving it to a future meeting. I don't have an objection. Are we on a deadline that we have to pass something by? No?
Is the question tonight, or is it you needing it in the afternoon?
Presently, it's tonight, being that this is we have a home game weekend, and all our other members, including the president of the Florida Restaurant Association and several of the other downtown owners that would like to be present, are all stuck in their kitchens tonight. On a Tuesday agenda or an afternoon agenda, so that half of the stakeholders could be
Mr. Mayor, I
represented.
move that we strike this item from the agenda and direct staff to bring it back at a future date on a non-home game weekend. But I do want to ask Ms. Shalley, it's my understanding that you have to hear plan board petitions in the evening, but that may not be the case. So I don't know if we can do it in the afternoon.
Madam Madam Attorney?
I was just trying to look that up, but I do believe your code does require them to be heard in the evening, but I'll look that up and then advise the clerk, so the soonest it can be
Is there a
heard.
second to the motion?
Second.
All right, so we have a motion and a second. Any discussion of
Would
it?
there be any possibility of having some early discussion of it and then have a final public comment in the evening, so that if folks couldn't be here in the evening, that they could at least get their input, and then have the final public comment and the vote in the evening?
No, Mayor, I don't believe that would be possible, because the petitions do have to be heard as one item.
Okay.
Okay, so
We'll
we
do the
have
best we can.
all right, so seeing no other, I don't think any members of the public would like to speak to this, so turning back to the commission, all in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, motion carries. Okay. Thank you. And
Thank you.
all that was done within 5 minutes. Less, 3
Appreciate it
minutes.
very much. I got to get back.
All right, thank you. Good luck to you. Good luck to your business. Next speaker, please.
Good evening. Name's John Davies. After much soul searching this past week, I had to get a few things off my chest and speak my mind. My commentary tonight, we're in trouble. Our government has become a reflection of what we've become as a society. Number one, fear. Here's the bottom line. We can't continue to go around the world being the world's policeman because of fear and paranoia and starting preemptive wars such as we did in Iraq. Mind our business, don't tread on us should be our new motto. There's not enough money or resources in the world to do otherwise. Irresponsibility. We can't cure all the country's ills and impoverishment due to misfortune and irresponsibility, much less the rest of the world. There simply isn't enough money and resources, and to think otherwise is a height of irresponsibility. If business and healthcare industry can't do so, then how the heck is government going to do it? By printing more funny money, I suppose? This is what charities such as the United Way, churches, and foundations are for. Number 3, wackos. If there's any global warming, and I have my doubts as to whether or not it even exists, or if it's even man-made or natural, here's the bottom line on that. To actually believe that biomass plant is better than coal or gas in dealing with global warming is a height of environmental wackiness. There is simply not enough money and resources to fund the environmental wackos and their costly, unproven agendas. We are now seeing that right here in Gainesville, firsthand with the Greg biomass plant. Our ratepayers are going to be taking it out behind because of electric bills, the higher groceries at the grocery stores, laundromat bills, and God only knows what else because of the higher cost of electricity. Conservation, conservation, conservation is the answer. Conserve energy. And let me tell you, if the liberals get their way with Obamacare, watch out. A carbon tax will be the next thing to fund it with. Next one is immorality. This weather speaks for itself here in Gainesville with a transgender ordinance for perverts who don't know the difference between the crown jewels of a woman and a man.
Attack on the person, that's your warning.
Okay. I'm still a Democrat, by the way, because there are just as many basket cases in the Republican Party as there are in the Democratic Party. As a former actor once said in a movie, man must know his limitations. This also applies to cities and countries. Also, least we do ourselves in economically. It used to be that 10% of the politicians gave the other 90% a bad name when I was growing up as a kid, but as a sign at a local laundromat said this morning, 90% of the politicians give the other 10% a bad name. That's how far down our country and our communities are going. This sums the whole situation up in a nutshell. And, we got basket cases voting for basket cases for our government officials. You can't make this stuff up either. The number for Obamacare is 1-800-F-blank-blank-KYOU. That should be GRU's new phone number. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for your comments. Next speaker, please.
Mr. Mayor, it's been a long time. My name is Harold Save. This is just an informational, hot off the press again. The Board of County Commissioners has assembled item 15 for next Tuesday, which is October the 8th, to hear some of the complaints about the GRU GREC biomass plant. The executive summary simply says the staff are providing the board with an update regarding noise and dust complaints arising from the startup of the new GREC biomass plant. The background, the startup of the recently completed biomass plant has resulted in a number of noise and dust-related issues being reported to the Gainesville Police Department, Alachua County staff, and the Sheriff's Office. Staff are providing the board with an updated version regarding these issues. The source of the noise and the dust complaints is the GREC biomass plant, which is located on property owned by the City of Gainesville and within the municipal boundaries of the City of Gainesville. 2, most of the noise complaints have come from the residents of Turkey Creek neighborhood, located within the municipal boundaries of Alachua County. 3, complaints from fugitive wood dust have primarily come from employees of Alachua County Public Works Department compound, which is the closest adjacent occupied property to the GREC plant. This will be agenda item 15 on Tuesday, October 8th. Everybody be there, listen up. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Next speaker, please.
Mike McKitchen, Mr. Mayor. Yesterday, I don't think that anybody said this in the public, but outside of the commission chambers or on the way out, the argument was produced to me that if we processed against the biomass plant for noise, we would be obligated to process against the Florida football games. I wanted to call everybody's attention to the fact that there's exemptions. There's a whole bunch of exemptions in the ordinance and sporting events, and I don't know why, but firecrackers and parades are exempted from the sound ordinance. So that can't be used as an excuse for not prosecuting Greg.
All right, thank you for your comments. Next speaker.
Mr. Mayor, Juanita Miles Hamilton, and good evening to each of you. I'm standing because I attended the NAACP meeting at Mount Pleasant United Methodist Church, which is
Pull the
the...
mic down just a little bit. There you go, thanks.
Okay. I attended the NAACP meeting that was held at Mount Pleasant United Methodist Church, which is the church of my commissioner in District 1. And at that meeting, it was stated that the rate increases by our general manager were lower than what the GRU told the S&P. At Mount Pleasant, we were told that in the first year it would be $14.38. The next year, the second year, $8, and then it was $1, $1 or $2 in the third year. On the S&P report, it's $14.38 the first year, $8.90 the second year, and $4.50 the third year, then $3.75 afterwards, and $1.70 and $1.20. And Mr. Mayor, could you please explain the large discrepancy, or was this a misprint in the report? Please advise. Thank you.
Thank you, and I think we will ask the manager at the conclusion of public comment if he could comment on, basically I think what people want is just one set of numbers that's
Yes.
used, whether it's used in a public forum or in our this information we provide to the bond rating agencies or the information we provide to the press. We want one standard number.
Yes,
So
because...
we'll ask about that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other, more public speakers, please?
Good evening, Mayor, Commissioners. My name is Debbie Martinez. Last week during the Plan Board meeting, the manager of the Gainesville Airport cited the Greg biomass plant as one of the 3 reasons to vote no on permitting construction of a residential neighborhood next to the runway of the noisy airport. He said the last thing that the commission needs is to have what happened to people surrounding the Greg biomass plant, of having what they're having to deal with, being assaulted with annoying, irritating noise pollution. Turkey Creek and other neighborhoods surrounding the Greg biomass plant could end up being another Coppers, a toxic wasteland for noise and air pollution, where residents must be bought out, relocated, and paid damages. While the Plan Board last week acted to protect the financial and health of citizens by supporting their interest over the profit motive of those who do not have their best interests at heart. Ms. Hanrahan invited Mr. Hunzinger to come to Gainesville and moved him to the top of the list of better qualified candidates to replace the man who kept GRU bills low. The Greg biomass plant has already cost GRU customers millions of dollars. Some of you have championed what Mr. Hunzinger has done, and last spring you gave him rave performance reviews and voted to give him a raise. Since Mr. Hunzinger has been here, citizens have been subjected to sky-high GRU bills and saddled with utility debt that has now reached $1 billion. And now, thanks to the support from some members of this commission, and you know who you are, the buck stops here. You have stood by and allowed this to happen. This is part of a larger betrayal of the public trust. You know who you are, also have stood by and allowed or encouraged leaders of your private club to attempt to silence real Democrats, most particularly members of the Alachua County Democratic Black Caucus, because they have spoken out about the injustice of the overpriced biomass contract and have voted for candidates who support their interests when some of you will not. And again, you know who you are. Fortunately, your club's disgraceful efforts to force members of the Black Caucus to shut up and stay in their place has failed. The courage of these patriotic Democrats will be an example that will guide Democrats, Independents, Republicans, and others in the coming city elections as voters continue electing city leaders who will look out for them as you have not. Thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you for your comments. Next speaker, please.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and Commissioners. Joe Beatty. I was watching the earlier part of the meeting, and you had an item on changing the meters and doing a pilot program at Innovation Square. And really talking to you here about process, and maybe at some point soon, I hope you'll look at some of the rules. That item, happened in the afternoon with not much public, well, it's obviously in the agenda, but no articles, nothing that would really reach out to the public to know that that's going on. Earlier, maybe a year or so ago, there was talk about smart meters, and people stood up here, and there's some, among the citizens, there were some concerns about that. And I guess I would just ask that, this is a major expenditure of money. I think it was $200,000 this year, and 14 and 15, 400,000. That's a total of $600,000. Fortunately, there were a few citizens that did make comments. I was unable to hear what the actual vote was. But what bothers me is that that's a significant issue, and it really isn't brought forth at a time that citizens who might be interested in that could speak out. I think, to start talking about switching over meters at this point and spending that kind of money when the money could be spent in other ways to help people with their bills. And we've got meters that are working, and as was said by some of the citizens, this is now, once again, for Innovation Square and everything centering around that. When you've got constituents that have been hurting for a long time and need relief, and we keep talking about it. And so I really would urge you to make sure you do a better public education. You want to get citizens involved. You complain about the electorate not participating, but there has to be some outreach from the commission, from the Public Relations Department. And the other issue that is of concern to me is how much money is frequently spent on the consent agenda. I've spoken to commissioners in other jurisdictions who say they don't pass anything on the consent agenda that has to do about money. And, we have a history of passing a lot of things on the consent agenda that really should be open to a little more scrutiny. And my third point is, I wish you would ask the people that have items on the agenda to provide more backup. I think that the paucity of backup with your items isn't fair to us, and I can only assume it isn't fair to you. I think we've been told that what we see on the agenda is what you see. And if you are making decisions of the magnitude you're making them on scant information, on PowerPoints, that I don't think that's right. And I think all that information needs to be available to you and to citizens. There are citizens that try to crunch the numbers, and it's very difficult to be running around asking for all this backup. Sometimes you want to see the spreadsheet, the numbers on which the PowerPoints have been distilled down to. And so I hope you would start making this information more easily available. And I don't want to wait till Government 2.0. Some of these things can be done right now. Thank you for your time.
Okay, thank you very much. Next speaker. And first, I want to say thank you for escorting that gentleman out who needed your assistance, Don. It was a good act of public service.
Exactly. Thank you, Mayor.
Okay, go ahead.
Commissioners. Yes, that's the first thing you do as a people representative and as a human being. You do for others as you want done. On this topic is on the GRU proposal.
We will talk about the GREC purchase proposal
This is just
later.
open mic?
So, yeah, not at this time. But other things that are on your mind.
Okay, great. What I have on my mind is about my own trailer park. And what's going on out there, the Lamplighter Trailer Park, is we got new managers again because Heritage Corporation cannot run their own businesses. They're putting people in there, inexperienced, uneducated, of what needs to be going on, and hiring people in the trailer park that are not licensed, not insured, and do not give them health insurance or anything. If they get hurt or if they ruin equipment, they're automatically fired. Here, these people that live in a trailer park that were doing this without license, so they can just get a buck for in the house, we're doing it without licenses. And to get back to the initiative of this is here, the city is allowing a corporation like Heritage Corporation to take and stay open, unlicensed, uninsured, and not having their permits or taxes being paid, and stay open. There's other trailer parks here that are operated in a decent manner, in decent form, and we're allowing this Heritage Corporation that owns trailer parks here, only two, Lamplighter and Candlelight, to stay open and not help the people. They're taking trailers that are from 1968, the year of 68, is the age of that trailer, and they're selling them for $20,000 to $30,000 to these people. How are people going to take and get ahead? These same trailers, you could go down to 13th Street and buy them from a trailer sales, a brand new one for what they're selling out there. So what I'd like to see is this trailer park company be closed down in Gainesville, and these people be made to take and pay for these people to be relocated out of that trailer park, and let that trailer park become part of the airport, in which years ago they came to the commission board and asked to take and purchase that land, and certain individuals wouldn't sell their lands. Well, let's put a land use over on them, and codes violations out there stacked at least 30 pages deep. GRU can't get nothing done because they won't do nothing. They won't work with them. They got roads out there, there's sinkholes up to 4 feet deep. People's parking lots, and even my own is starting to get a sinkhole in it. And these people are not taking and addressing it. They need to come from wherever they are, come to this trailer park and see what they have and what the city is allowing them to stay open. We need to take and shut down what I call renegade trailer park owners like this, shut them down and put somebody in there who will run it properly. We got Arredondo. If you've ever been down to Arredondo, that's a nice trailer park. Westgate Trailer Park, that's a nice trailer park. I can name a few of them, but what my intention is to take and let this city commission and the city public out there know what's going on in their city and how these people are being forced into St. Francis House and other homeless shelters and in the woods. And I just got through helping 4 people. They can get a bus ticket to go to North Carolina to their family that were living on the street because they got evicted from there. And how many more I've got to take and come up with money out of my own budget when I only get $974 a month, but I make it. Why can't this be an example for others? You do for others you want done. But
You're at 5
this is
minutes.
not
Can
done.
you begin to draw it to a close?
So my opinion is that I'd like the city commission and zone department or whatever departments there is to come out there and take and address their books and that and see if we can't get these people some kind of help.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
And I think what we would say is to the manager is if we would like to know if there's sort of an abnormal or disproportionate number of code violations in that particular area, because that would be step one, would be to see if the amount of code violations is really out of proportion with other areas before we could take more serious action.
Yeah.
Okay.
And what they say to me is that because of relocating the people, they can't follow through with this code violation because they'd have to relocate the people. Well, relocate the people. We get
Well,
applicable
before we
trailer
can get
parks,
there,
so,
what I've asked the city manager to look into is the first step we have to take.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very
Appreciate
much. Next member of the public would like to speak. We'll get to you. No coffee.
Good evening, Mayor, Commissioners. Mark Vensky of the Near South neighborhood in Gainesville. Mayor, I really enjoy attending city commission meetings and ancillary meetings of the various committees and so forth. Would love to be here for every thrilling minute of these commission meetings. But today I tried to use some discretion and use my time a little more wisely to take care of some business as the afternoon session of this meeting progressed, and made good use of that. That makes it makes it impossible for folks like myself to comment on items that were on the agenda this afternoon or that may be on the agenda after public comment period tonight or in future meetings. Please consider
As long as you
allowing,
keep it within your time limit, if you want to comment on something that we've covered.
I appreciate it, I'll be real brief, very brief. In the past, various citizens have brought up concerns or made observations about past actions and of various staff members. And they were not insulting, and they were not directed at character or anything like that. They were talking about the actions, which you yourself have cautioned citizens to limit their comments to. But you intervened and asked the speakers to not stray into those areas. Please review that as well and allow citizens to comment on the actions of past actions of city staff members. As I've communicated to all of you commissioners in email messages this past week, I've hit on some things, and one of those is when sending copies of those comments to other folks in Gainesville resulted in some positive feedback. One of those is the establishment of an unaltered water dispensing station here in Gainesville. It would allow people who are concerned about additives to their drinking water to obtain water that has none of those additives. I'm talking specifically about chlorine and fluoride. These are long brewing controversies and concerns, and many people really hate to be putting those things in their bodies, and each drink of water they feel that's a violation of their rights to be able to not have contaminants in their drinking water. I can't claim complete credit for that idea, because a small town in central Indiana where my family has family members. My family has family members, yes. I have family members in this small town, I really do. And there's a road cut where the hillside is moist, and someone drove a pipe into that hillside years ago, and water flows continuously from a natural occurring well, and townspeople get drinking water there. What I was talking about, as I indicated in my email message to all of you, is such a facility, maybe, well, certainly a little more fancy than that, that would have taps, or that would have faucets from which people concerned about the quality of their water could draw water. So I'm continuing to develop it. More ideas keep coming to me and to myself, and others keep contributing ideas to that general thing, and I will be reapproaching you on that in the future. But please give that solid consideration. People should have the right to get the kind of water they need or want, and I'd like to see you all work to that end. Well, what do we have? About a minute left here. Sorry for the delay.
You don't have to use it.
Or not. Or not, yeah,
Or
okay.
reserve the remainder of your time.
Yes, yes, yes. Okay, I'm gonna end it there, I guess. Oh, here, if we could get some clarification from, I believe, Mr. Hunsinger later on. There is there are a couple items in the agenda here. One is the quotation of up to $9,000 over 4 years. And this is concerning the qualified target industry. And it's unclear to me whether that's $9,000 every year or $9,000 for all 4 years.
All right, now we're back on the agenda.
Yeah, I thought I was being brief as you asked me to.
All right, well, your time's concluded.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, please.
Good evening. My name is Mario Perez. Is this thing working right? Okay. I just wanted to share with you my situation. During the summer, we kept the thermostat in the house at 82 degrees all through the summer. I come here and I noticed that in here it's about 78, which is the federal regulation for during the summer. And I was wondering if there's any way to raise the thermostat in here, so there'd be less money spent in here, and then maybe we can have a little bit more in our house. I mean, the situation is funny, but it isn't, because, and I don't know how many of you can empathize or sympathize with it. This week, we went ahead and changed the water heater thing from, we have a control that says vacations, a control that says warm, a control that says hot. So now, before last week, we were at warm. Now, between warm and vacation, with the last notch next to vacation to try to save some money. I don't presume that this is going to be solved. But I don't think I'm in the bottom poverty level here in Gainesville. And if I am having these problems, or we are having this problem as a family, I presume that a large portion of other people in Gainesville are having probably a worse situation. So I don't know how this is going to affect anybody, but if you could do something about it, like lowering the utility bills or lowering the money that they're taking out, that would help, period. I have a question now, which is, what is the procedure for asking you to make a proclamation? When I was coming here on a regular basis before, Mayor Lowe, in every meeting made 5 or 6 proclamations for everybody, the strawberry pickers, every group. And I think that I would like to know from you, really short, the procedure to do that, to ask you to make a proclamation.
Well, I know that on our city's website, there's the link you can get to submit a request. But since you're here in person, if you want one, our clerk is right there, and he can communicate to my office, what you want for a proclamation.
I appreciate it very much. I think it's a group of people that get overlooked on a continuous basis. And I think I would like to see a proclamation that could be called the Freedom Proclamation, or the Bill of Rights Proclamation, or the right to speak up, or the right to defend themselves from things that appear unjust. It's a group of people in Gainesville that come in here day in and day out, every week, every month, every year. I gave up after the first 2 or 3 months of it. But these people are the real heroes. They're the real patriots. They're the ones who don't get paid. They don't get $35,000 to be there. But they do research on their own. They raise points on their own. They go and hire lawyers on their own, and all for their contribution to a constitutional government or a group that can govern. They never get recognized. Joy doesn't get recognized. Diane doesn't get recognized. Juanita doesn't get recognized. Miss Doris doesn't get recognized. Ray doesn't get recognized. And I don't even know all these people. But I know day after day after day they are working for the citizens of Gainesville. And I would like to have them recognized. So if the secretary or the clerk could put that in there, I would really appreciate it. There's people who get paid, and even when somebody like Diane brings up the fact that some numbers are incorrect, and somebody should look at them, they don't look at them. And those are the people who should really be doing the work that these people are doing. Once again, thank you so much, and long live these guys that are really, and girls, that are really doing great work for the city of Gainesville.
What's your name again? I didn't get it down.
First name is Mario, last name Perez.
Thank you very much. All right, next speaker. Any more members of the public wish to address City Commission?
Good evening, Mayor
Name for the
and
record.
Commissioners. It's good to be here again. I'm here to thank you all tonight.
Name for the record.
Oh, that's right. I'm Dwayne Gilday. Speaking as a citizen, hint, you guys do a very difficult job and take a lot of crap for it, and are faced with an enormous amount of information presented, honestly, sometimes in confusing and apparently, hint, deceptive ways. And you deal with that admirably as a whole. And for that, I just want to applaud you as a body. It really is amazing. And what the gentleman just said about the citizens that are sort of following along unpaid, doing that too, that is truly amazing too. This is a ridiculously complicated city that we've got going on here. And you guys, for very little pay, give it your all. All of you do. Staff, elected officials, you really do. And we appreciate that. Even when we disagree, we really do appreciate that. I want to especially call out Commissioner Hinson Rawls for her truly amazing work in her district. Ma'am, I am honestly very proud of you, and keep talking about it, because I couldn't be prouder to have sat on a few small committees with you before you sit where you sit now, and learned a lot from you, and am still learning. And also, Commissioner Wells, your work continues to greatly please and inspire me. All of you do great work. Even you, Mayor Brady, I want to take a special moment to thank you for a few things. I thank you for being elected, because in my opinion, speaking as a citizen, this town will benefit from your time on the dais, at the dais. I think we will grow enormously. As I've told you the few times we've had a chance to speak in private, most recently at the Latino Festival, thank you, Commissioner Wells, also for joining us. We have more in common, you and I personally, than I think you would be stunned. A lot of the things you say about fiscal common sense and things that jump out at you and things that appear kind of, what the hell is this? I absolutely agree with you. So thank you for not being afraid to call those things out. We need someone that can do that, and I don't know that we had that before, so I thank you for that. A few more things to thank you for. Thank you for understanding the difference between the responsibilities of and accountability held by a, say, entertainer on a talk show and, say, an elected official. Appreciate you understanding that difference, because it's a big one. And also, I really thank you for not waiting to share with us your ideas about a faster, more efficient, smaller, leaner, less expensive, better government. Don't wait for the spring elections. Share those ideas with us now, sir. We if you're here to lead, we're ready to hear those ideas. I want to ask all of you and thank you in advance for remembering that we are all neighbors first. We are all in this city together. It's a tiny city. The further up you go from it, Google Earth out once and you'll see how tiny we are. We're all in this together. We're neighbors first. So I kind of wish sometimes, you know how the Board of County Commissioners will sit around a table and look at each other. I think you guys don't benefit from that as often as you might. That would be nice to see at some point, because you don't get to see each other and the non-verbal things that you're communicating as much as we do. Also, I'm very, very proud of you guys that when you met with the county commissioners the other day, or the other week, whenever it was amazing how efficient this body appeared in the context of that incredibly distorted meeting. I just stood up and cheered, and I've spoken to some of you privately about that. You convened as a body in the middle of their meeting and efficiently did your job, and we're done, and you looked like professionals that day, and maybe not everyone else up there did. And final thing, thanks for the great work you do again. Thank you for, Mayor, you do this weird thing where you talk to yourself, and thank you for trying to not do that, doing that up on the dais, because trust me, we've got crazy covered on this side. We don't need any up there. So
I
thanks.
resemble that remark. Thank you for those comments. And the flattery. I haven't heard such since Mark Anthony spoke to his colleagues in the Senate.
I thought that was Cleopatra.
No.
Good evening, Commissioners, Mr. Mayor. My name is Paula Husey-Stamer.
Okay.
I wanted to follow up on something I had offered to you last night and I did not speak about. It's not, it is related to what is on the agenda for GREC, but it is not directly related to it. It's more directly related to the issue of biomass and environmental consequences. So if I could have permission to...
As long as we're not talking about the purchasing or the financial arrangement relative to the biomass plant.
No, I'm not. If I might. This is a copy of what I had given to the clerk last night to be distributed to each of you. And it's a multi-page document. It's not meant to be a big picture that pulls together everything about GREC. From my perspective, it is instead to give you some cited information so that with regard to a number of the things that have been stated before you, you know that there are official citations for these things. I'm not making them up. So I just wish to call your attention to a few of them. On page 4 of the handout, I don't know how well this is going to show up with the size of the print. There are a few quotes from the Public Service Commission order with regard to the biomass plant. And the need petition. And quote, "There is considerable uncertainty about the economics of this project because the overall cost effectiveness of the GREC project is heavily dependent upon the cost of future carbon regulation and the potential resale of half the project's capacity." As you know, the expectations at the time the city had with regard to carbon regulation were quite different from what the reality is that we're dealing with now. The decision, or the PSC order, does say that the project could result in a loss of approximately $56 million. However, that figure does not take into account what we know now to be the potential risk exposure that you have because of recent action both by the EPA and a federal appellate court in D.C. with regard to carbon. Under the conclusion paragraph, I would like to point out the very polite way in which the PSC basically said, if this were an IOU, if GRU were an IOU, and there's no way they would have approved the need petition. If GREC LLC contracted with an IOU, recovery of payments made under the purchase power agreement would be subject to our approval, and we would be able to prevent ratepayers from paying above avoided cost for the renewable energy and the capacity of the project. And the implication there is that they regarded the costs, the inevitable costs from GREC as being too high, but they felt, for reasons that I disagree with, that illegally they didn't have the jurisdiction to prohibit GRU from entering into the agreement. In the lower paragraph, it states, if after a review it were found that an IOU should have stopped construction or pursued a more cost-effective alternative, we can adjust the IOU's rates accordingly. However, we do not have final rate making authority over municipal utilities and will not review the final costs or establish rates resulting from the proposed GREC contract. There was no need for the PSC to put that language in there unless there were a majority among them who felt reticent about the financial appropriateness of the GREC arrangement. On the next page, on page 5, there is a chart. It compares emissions, projected emissions from GREC with a 431 megawatt gas diesel plant in Massachusetts. And I will try to provide a chart that compares GREC emissions with what we understand Deerhaven 2 emissions to be.
And just so you know, you're at 5 minutes, so if you can begin
Oh, already, I'm
draw to
sorry.
a conclusion.
I apologize. I didn't realize.
You can finish up.
Other pages in this document have quotes from the EPA and from the Federal Appellate Court decision, as well as other authorities with regard to the issue of carbon neutrality and the science behind that theory. So I urge you to at least look at the text. The citations are provided, so if you want to look at more language, it's available. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Any other members of the public wish to speak at this time?
Yes, good evening, Mr. Mayor. Ernesto Martinez. I just want to speak briefly about an issue last night that was discussed pertaining to the noise problem out at Turkey Creek. I would like to remind you and encourage you to please keep that at the top of your list. As Mr. McEachin presented earlier, there are exemptions for celebratory and meritorious events, which are normal things that we do celebrate and enjoy here in the city of Gainesville. And I would like to respectfully waive the remainder of my time to Mr. Scott and or Mr. Washington should they need it, if I may. Thank you, sir.
Well, during public comment, we don't borrow time like that.
Okay.
So,
thank you very much. That's all I got to say.
Thank you. Next member of the public, please.
Mr. Mayor, Commissioners, Nathan Scott. As reported in the Gainesville Sun, there's a substantial discrepancy between the electric rate increases communicated to S&P by GRU management and the electric rate increases communicated to Commissioner Henson Rawls' constituent and the NAACP at the recent event held at her beautiful church. As also reported by the Gainesville Sun, another substantial discrepancy exists between the projected electric rate increases in the 2012 bond issuance statement and against the numbers in the S&P report. As quoted by the Gainesville Sun, GRU general manager could not provide an explanation for this substantial discrepancy. Another smaller discrepancy also exists in the $151 number for 2015 shown in the GRU slides presented last night and that will be presented later tonight. Simply put, the GRU math just doesn't seem to add up. The confusion and frustration that many people feel, in part, is due to how different numbers are used in different circumstances to different groups of people. Can we just publicly settle on one set of numbers for the projected rate increases? We've heard iteration after iteration, and it's all contradictory. So, Mr. Mayor, tonight, can we please ask the general manager to conclusively tell us what the correct numbers are, the ones used at the church event in front of Commissioner Henson Rawls' constituents, the NAACP, are the ones found in other documents that I've referenced. I think this is very important to be honest, candid, and truthful. The truth has not been forthcoming for many, many months that I and many other dedicated citizens have appeared before this commission and begged to just come forward with the truth. The truth will set you free. No matter how painful, anything above the truth is upside. So turning to the discussion at the meeting last night, Mr. Mayor, and I don't want to overlap, but I am talking about a historical event that is also something that will come up again later tonight, but I'm talking in the context of the what happened at last night's meeting. So turning to the discussion at the meeting last night, it was extremely disappointing to see GRU management resort to preemptive damage control prior to Ms. Shalley offering her legal opinion by using one attorney against another. And the reason I'm saying this is that I believe a statement was made that seemed to suggest that Ms. Shalley's opinion should be given significantly less weight than utility attorney Ms. Shayla McNeil's, because Ms. Shalley had not been directly involved in the biomass contract as long as Ms. McNeil. Now, the city attorney and Ms. McNeil are both excellent attorneys, and such acts of desperation by GRU management puts both of these attorneys in a very awkward situation. So at the end of the day, this commission voted unanimously to hire the city attorney. And in this regard, I would hope that you would trust her independent judgment with respect to the risk associated with NUCO as communicated last night. Ms. Shalley is spot on. Please do not ignore her prudent legal advice in the same manner that GRU management failed to mitigate the substantial risk identified in the Public Service Commission order. As to the NUCO proposal presented last night, I will keep my comments brief.
Yeah, because we are going to be addressing this, so
yes.
please, we don't want to go there.
Yes, but I do want to clarify what was said last night, Mr. Mayor, just, and I'll use
We can clarify that at that time.
All right, I'll reserve my time for that. Thank you.
Next speaker, please.
Okay.
GFT is second.
Okay, and
This will be first.
so what is our goal for this item tonight? What are we trying to accomplish?
And I talked with the general manager prior to the meeting, and I promptly forgot everything we talked about. So, and maybe you can tell us. What we're trying to do, the way I remember it, Mr. General Manager, is I would say this is an opportunity for us to remove from the table things we're done with. So, for example, we can just stick with the contract as is. We can make an offer that's inclusive of the 1603 grant, meaning we're putting together a corporate entity to help us, or we can make an offer without the corporate entity in that. And what I would hope is after a staff presentation, if our minds, meaning 4 or more, are solidly made up against one of those three, let's take it off the table so that staff no longer has to worry about it. We don't have to worry about it. And then that leaves, getting us to Monday, then we can really zero in on whichever fork in the road we are intending to go down. Okay. So, Mr. General Manager, is that somewhere close to what we talked about?
That's similar, Mr. Mayor. Our intent tonight was to talk about the risk item, which we did not get to present yesterday. We had a few follow-ups today, but I think given the time constraint, if we get this item started, we would certainly concentrate on the risk and take advantage of our good friends from Infront and Burns & McDonnell this evening.
Okay. Commissioner?
Yeah, okay. I mean, kind of in consort with what Commissioner Wells said, I mean, if there's additional information we need to use your words, to cogitate on over the weekend, for informational purposes, I'd rather keep the bulk of our discussion and debate to Monday and make decision points there. Because I know where you're going, but I'm not ready to make that final determination now, and I would hope my colleagues aren't, because there's a lot to think about, and that would just be my plead to the board.
Okay.
Thanks.
Fair enough. Well, why don't we get started with the presentation, Mr. General Manager?
They're going to go for some risk analysis.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Bob Hunsinger, General Manager. And Mr. Mayor, I think I'm going to collect on that beer by 10 o'clock. All right, so real quick, I did want to alert the commission, we had a handout tonight. Ms. Wilson couldn't be here tonight, but I did want to make one correction on the item that says the $620 million purchase with no grant and the $620 million GRU debt. She inadvertently copied over the same line, which would be the second one down, the purchase 620 with no grant, whereas what was in the handout was 137.75 for the 2015 number. That number is 141.85, and what we'll do is we'll go through that next Monday.
Yeah.
But I just wanted to alert you that it didn't change potential monthly savings, but there was one line there that was a little different. So that'll be a Monday item, and I had just a few comments before we get to John and our consultants. So there was a lot of discussion yesterday on uncertainty and the need for more information, so tonight is some of that additional information. We certainly understand the concern. As I mentioned on September 19th, we're not going to be able to get in the 60-day period that ends October 22nd all of the information to the commission that might be necessary from your standpoint. We're going to give you all the information we can in that period on those main topics. So that's been our goal, is to try to provide that information. But realize that we could spend 2 years doing this and you may not still have all that information. So just a brief comment there. I think that I did want to say, if we get to Monday night, one thing we will talk about there is the 1603 grant in totality. You heard some comments last night. There is certainly additional information on that that you might want to consider. We will also go over the metrics without the grant at that time and any additional financial information and try to answer questions that we picked up on from last night. I think I will truncate my comments at this point to allow Mr. Stanton to start the risk discussion.
Okay.
Mayor, Commissioners, John Stanton, GRU. If we could go to the overhead, please. Okay. We left off in starting to discuss risk, and we had a number of areas we were going to talk to briefly because there's so many areas for discussion. We heard last night other comments and other concerns, so what I have here, what is in black was what was on the slide last night, and the items in yellow, or excuse me, yellow, in blue, are the ones that added today to address. And the first one being in here on the risk analytics. Last night we heard from Commissioner Wells, Commissioner Chase, and several others regarding the risk, how optimistic are things, how pessimistic are, how conservative are we, how optimistic are we. And so I'd like to take just a few minutes to talk about the approach to the risk analytics on this. As we know, there's hundreds of variables involved in this. If you take a look at the probability distribution of something that, and this one is shown as being normally distributed, some are not, but most are. You've got what's the probability of it occurring and at what value. I've used an example in here of the fixed O&M cost in here, and where if you use the point estimate of the assumption of being the midpoint, you are setting yourself up for, well, we've got a 50% chance of being wrong in one direction. The benefit, it could be better, but it could be worse. Equally, set up that way. But that's not just generally what we do. In doing it, it's more like this, where you would put your estimate of your target, your assumption, where you are diminishing the negative result. Okay. In doing this, assumption after assumption after assumption, this is just a pan back out just a little bit. If we got assumption number 1, 2, and 3, and 4, and so forth, just examples, that where you're taking the negative tail of the probability, if you can look at that as, well, here's the net present value of the negative worth of the decision being on the bad side of the assumption. And you add these things up, what you would want to do in your risk analytics is to end up where the sum of those tails times some factor that you would put in there is no greater than the net present value of the project, i.e., when things go bad, you will never be worse off than you were if you had taken the other alternative. Now, I think it's fairly clear that you wouldn't expect rationally for everything to go wrong, and you wouldn't expect it for it to go completely wrong. So if you added up the tails in that, you usually in your risk analytics, you go in and you say, okay, well, I'm going to say 50% of that, 75% of that. And that is a judgment call based on whoever is making that judgment. But in going through here, and I show this, that what you end up with, if you add all of these things up, is an overall probability distribution, something like this. And I believe this is what we have concerning the probability of the outcome of the proposal to purchase the GREC facility, where, yes, we have some negative possibility, but we have a much greater upside than we have done. Yes, things can go wrong. There is risk, but there is a higher probability because of where we are setting the assumptions.
Can you pause for questions?
Certainly.
Okay, Commissioner Chase.
Where'd you get this? I mean, this is this like, is this a simple, I'm serious. This is like risk analytics 101, but I mean, is this?
They teach this.
I'm just not sure where this even came from and what exactly.
That's what I've used in the past to evaluate projects.
Was this done 5 years ago? Do you know? Were you part of the risk analytics?
Not on this.
You weren't?
I've done this 20 years ago on other projects.
All right.
These
are your slides?
Yeah, I whipped them up. They had my assistant put them together this morning, just as an example. I could have hand-drawn them, but my handwriting's crappy.
Okay.
But the point, one of the other things I'd like to mention too is the difference between, if I go back to this, the sensitivity versus probability. We heard last night some examples of, well, if you take this thing and it's different by 10% and you escalate it by this, it eats up this much net present value. And if this happens over here, it does this. And all that is absolutely true in a model. But that's the sensitivity to it. The other factor is the probability that will happen. Yes, if some parameter moved 10%, it would have this big effect. True. The model's sensitive to that. But what's the probability of that happening? So the risk is the cross product of that probability and the sensitivity. You have to look at both of those in looking at this.
Mr. Stanton?
Yes.
I don't want to interrupt, but we do have another question.
So just on that point, Mr. Stanton, I just want to add some context to it. So you're saying, if we're taking, say, the fuel procurement portion of the contract, we said, well, if fuel prices doubled, that's the sensitivity portion, this is what would happen. But the probability of fuel prices doubling has an X value. It might be 5% probability that would actually happen, or it might be a 90% probability. But what you're saying is you're factoring both of those. Something may have a great effect, there's a great sensitivity to that fluctuation, and then it may have a high probability a medium probability or a low probability of actually happening?
A specific example, one of the things that was mentioned last night is the sensitivity, and the word was used capacity factor in here, but it's really availability factor, which we talked about a couple of weeks ago, are different things. And yes, it's sensitive to that, but in the probability of the capacity factor falling to use the number 85%, the availability factor, average over 30 years is extremely improbable. If you've got something that's affecting your plant that so severely, you fix it. Matter of fact, if you have a plant that's 90% available for 29 years and you spend one entire year shutting that plant down, fixing it, it comes out to be 87% available. So yes, the model's very sensitive to capacity factors, but the probability in reality that you would allow a condition to exist for that over 30 years would drive your capacity factor that low is very, very improbable.
And what you're presenting to us is that analysis for each one of these different risk factors.
Well, and what I'm saying is showing that the kind of thinking that goes into this, and there's a lot of different phraseology, one thing being conservative, and there was a lot of discussion about, well, how optimistic are these assumptions? And back to this, the assumptions are made, they are biased. They are biased in the direction of being conservative, that there is a lot of opportunity on the upside. The numbers in the model, although there is downside, say there is good value and there is a higher probability that the value will be better rather than worse. Does that mean it can't get worse? No, of course it doesn't mean that. But I wanted to talk about that there's a lot of thought given to the distribution of risks around all of these assumptions, that they are not just looked at as one thing, and they certainly are not being set at a point that is optimistic or even a balance between the positive and the negative. They are being intentionally biased in the conservative direction. So,
May I just ask a question?
Certainly.
This does sort of beg the question as a thought experiment to try to understand what we think we're taking on in the future, which is an unknown, to apply the same kinds of metrics. I don't know how many you say you had approximately on that. What can you show the one with all of the?
Oh, this is a hypothetical.
That's a hypothetical.
Clearly, with this project, we have neither the time nor some of the data to be able to do what you can do in theory.
If you really had all the time, right?
Now, what you would want to do is try to get as much data on the ones that.
So they're not just theoretical, and I suppose you even would say that the risk curve is not always that perfect. You would adjust that, even reflecting some things that you might know in reality. You've used and maybe that's what's driving Commissioner Chase a little batty. But the thought experiment of applying it to the biomass contract that we entered into, in fact, based on what we knew at that time and where we were in those theoretical estimates of risk compared to what has in fact occurred, would be a fascinating way of understanding where did we come out in that tail or not tail. I suppose you can contemplate worse circumstances that could have occurred or better circumstances than occurred, but I'd be curious of how far they were afield from where we thought we were. And when you talk about, as you say, taking responsibility for operating the plant for 30 years as opposed to having that on the other party, a question just comes to mind to say, well, what is our practical experience with Deer Haven, for example, given the amount of time that we've had to take it down, for repair or significant upgrades of environmental requirements? Because those themselves reflect our actual experience as compared to what your theoretical projection for the future is.
And that's as discussed at the last time when we presented the data on that regarding the availability factor for Deerhaven. It's been at that 90% or better for the last 12 years, and 93% or better.
With the exception of when it's been out of service.
Yeah, with the normalized planned outage, so it kind of weighs with the smaller plant.
And does the operating and maintenance dollar figure that you're using reflect those sorts of routine outages? Because you've done some significant time out and maintenance upgrades, not the big one for environmental requirements. Is that contemplated within the scope of the O&M that you're contemplating, those same kinds of significant upgrades, or not significant upgrades, significant maintenance routines that you've been doing with Deerhaven?
The O&M is based on the same presumption of most plants, different numbers, but that it is in fact maintenance to keep the systems running as they are now, or at the level they were when they were designed at design criteria. There is capital money in the budget of plants and in the pro forma for an acquisition of GREC in order to make capital upgrades on systems that as needed throughout the life of the plant.
Is that accommodated in the assumptions that we're using right now? Because I've heard O&M, but I haven't heard what I think you're describing there, which sounds like a little bit more an ongoing capital fund for more significant maintenance.
There are assumptions, and they're in the model from PFM. You'll find them on tab 1 inputs. I believe it's in there. I'm pretty sure it's on that page where we're looking at there are assumptions for fixed O&M, there's assumptions for variable O&M, there's assumptions for capital. And there's assumptions for availability, there's assumptions for other things. And those assumptions gets back to my point, and I've got a couple other quick things to say, and then I'd like to move into getting back to the specific risks that we're talking about here. But that gets back to setting those assumptions that I'm just mentioning here with a much smaller downside risk than there is an upside opportunity. One of the things that I'd like to say here too is, and I commented on this I think once before, and it may have been in the budget rather than during this discussion on GREC per se, but when somebody else takes your risk, you're paying them for it. There's been a lot of comment about, well, now we're going to take on this risk that's fixed in the GREC budget. Okay. GREC people, as everybody knows, are smart business people. They didn't fix the O&M for 30 years at one level. They've heard the word inflation. They know it exists. And they knew they were taking on that risk. So they have built into there the premium for us letting them manage that risk for us. Okay. So you say, well, we don't have that risk. Yeah, you kind of do in that you're paying for it already. Now, if you were to acquire the asset, then that risk premium goes away. It's money, profit back here, and you might end up using some of it to address an inflation problem or some other issue, some other risk that they're managing for you, but you probably won't use all of it. So anyway, whenever you ask somebody else to manage a risk for you, you're going to pay for it. It only makes sense. And what I'd like to do at this point is back to the distribution of those risks and get another opinion from, introduce one of our consultants. Oh, I have one other thing, quick thing before I do that. Up in here, managing risk after the fact. And this is another thing that was mentioned. We don't just establish the risk at the time of the purchase or at the beginning of any deal and live with it forever. You have to manage as you go. So what we can do, or anybody can do as an owner that you cannot do as the off-taker, is manage that risk, because you've paid somebody else to manage it for you. But once you return that risk, now you can work on those processes so that over over the period of time from which you acquired the asset until, as you go forward, you try to narrow the variation around that risk. You get better and better on how much your production cost is going to be every year, what your heat rate's going to be, what this is going to be, what the other is going to be, and then shift the mean so that you're minimizing that tail and that negative possibility to reduce that risk as you go. So it's not just establishing the risk level when you go into the project. It's at least, if not more important, how you manage it as you go. And one last comment on that before introducing one of our consultants, the comment about, there was just some discussion last night about the risk in buying a power plant. There is risk in buying a power plant, and I think everybody's aware. I've had some experience in that in prior life and so forth, but I've also had experience in building power plants. And I will tell you one thing, it is far, far more risky to build a power plant than it is to buy a power plant that's already completely built. And I say that in that for 100 years, GRU has been taking on the risk of building power plants, the construction risk, the environmental permitting risk, and every other risk, and been doing it successfully. So I don't see, personally, professional opinion, taking on the risk of buying one to be any larger a risk than the risk that GRU has exercised over and over again over the last 100 years of building power plants from scratch. With that, I'd like to introduce, the consultants here from in front. Yes.
Could you refresh my memory of when you came to work for us here at GRU in Gainesville?
The beginning of time was June 1st, 2008.
And as I recall, having spoken to you on a number of occasions in your prior lives, in addition to running plants, you've I gather consulted or been a part of the team that has evaluated purchasing of plants before?
That is correct.
And presumably that's primarily a question of what is the right price for that plant in that condition, and knowing what you know about running them successfully then, or with the expectation that it can be run at a reasonable likelihood of profitability and so forth.
That is correct.
Right. Okay. So at the end of the day, I think, you've spoken with a great deal of confidence, I think, ever since this contemplation going back into last year, when really the question was, whatever the outcome of our relationship with our contractor, a possible outcome is the right of buying this plant at some price. So at the end of the day, you feel that you've been in this place before in other roles, in a directly analogous thing, that is to say, here's a plant, are we going to buy it? What price are we going to offer? Because at the end of the day, we're talking about buying it, but really it's only about the ability to offer. You feel you've been in very much a similar position in previous, not just the running, but this purchase price situation.
Yes.
So I'm going to be, I think I'd like to see more and understand more about the analogous situations that you might have had in this situation where you had metrics and how those metrics may have compared or not compared to the information that we have. Because it strikes me that one thing we don't have are all of the information that we'd like to have. We spent a lot of time trying to get that, or that's my sense, or in the pre-purchase agreement, effectively trying to get that. So, I would be interested at specifically to this point, not tonight, obviously, trying to get a handle on how this looks compared to a prior you in a very similar situation.
I'd be happy to share my previous experiences, but I'm not sure they're analogous.
Okay.
In that the value to an investor-owned company with certain other financial goals and certainly other areas of opportunity cost to do other things with money are really some different considerations. but I'd be happy to discuss
I mean,
that.
I think that they're more relevant than maybe that would let on, because cities too have opportunity costs. And there are a lot of other things we could be doing with our ability to borrow now. The reality is it's the utility, it's not the city. So there's, it's not like we're going to go buy the subway system underneath the Innovation Square to the campus that I'd like to build. Forget the streetcar. But
I'd go for that.
well, with 5 million square feet, I think that might be a question. Anyhow, so I would like to see if there might be more value to that experience than maybe you let on in that answer. But I don't want to stop you from going on, because I know you're going to.
What I'd like to do now is introduce John Painter from Enfront, and they have done an independent look at some of the value and the distribution of that value for the purchase of GREC. So I'd like to have him give that. He is the CEO of Enfront, which is a consultant and advisors to the energy sector, and I'll let him amplify a little bit about that and his background. John?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Commissioners. I'm going to need to, I've not used one of these before, so. Just a brief introduction to our company. We're a small, relatively new company. All of the principals have between 25 and 40 years of experience in the electric power industry. We've analyzed numerous power purchase agreements, numerous power supply resources. Team members have managed power plants, managed public utilities, managed municipal utilities. So we have tremendous experience in the area. Our strength is in performing analyses that are informed by the real world of the experience of operations and planning.
Could I?
Yes,
Mr. Mayor,
Commissioner.
I'm sorry, just got to have your name again.
John Painter.
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 Okay, and I'm going to cyber stalk you for a bit, just, I'll be upfront. Thanks.
Okay.
You guys don't have a website.
Just to be clear about what our assignment was. Our assignment was to perform an independent identification of risk and assessment of that risk. And if I could take just a minute, by that we mean the probability, if you will, and the amount by which the benefits could be different than the baseline projections you've been shown so far. You've seen this presentation has been up on the several times in the last few days. It shows a projected net present value level of benefits. We chose the $720 million purchase price, the $120 million grant, and you've been provided a projected present worth benefit of $203 million. To put it simply, we were asked, here's the information we're working with, here's the power purchase agreement, go away for a few days and think through the risks and do an independent analysis and tell us whether that $203 million is a conservative estimate, maybe it's an optimistic estimate, but come back and give us an independent assessment of that. So that was our charge, and that's what we've done.
We have a question. Commissioner Wells.
Yes, sir.
With your extensive experience, to what extent does some of the information that you're prepared to provide us put us at a material disadvantage, given that we know that the other party is fully aware of everything that we know, or everything that's being presented, certainly in this setting, or any documents that you provide us, and we are aware of very little, relatively, of what their internal calculations are?
It would be better if everything I told you could be kept in confidence.
They're watching this show.
All right, and no one let anything get out of this room.
They're watching you on TV.
Get our spray can.
They're watching
But-
you
That
now.
was sarcasm, sorry.
But
Okay.
this is in the public domain.
Have you, okay, yeah, and I understand that. Have you, among that many experiences, have this sort of relationship where you were evaluating for one party that was in the public and one party that was not?
Most of my
Suppose the
work
answer-
over my career has been done for municipal entities.
Okay.
However, I've worked in other parts of the country where the sunshine laws are different. In most other places I've worked, you do have the opportunity to go into executive session to discuss something like this.
And I'm particularly referencing the fact that this is not, I mean, the right of first offer is a very special animal that's very different than things where, you know, you get to see what the other party has, and then you get to match that, or something like that, like a right of first refusal. And, I mean, they get a full year. Almost any number we come up with, they could go out and shop around a year. If it turns out that we're by magic $10 above the other guy's, you know, offer. So I'd be interested if you have any thoughts as to how to deal with the reality of where we're at. Are you in Florida? Where's your firm based out of?
We are based in Orlando, Florida.
So do you have folks on your staff, I guess I'm curious about the others, who are particularly aware of the legal aspects? Because one thing I didn't ask Mr. Stanton was, there's a lot of this is technical and operational and financial risk assessment, not so much of the legal. And you know, it strikes me that that's a major portion of this that we so far have really not grappled with. What is our actual exposure to an accusation that, you know, as we were before, that we were not within our rights to claim that they were out of compliance with their contract, and therefore they came back and you know, asserted that they were going to ask the arbiter for a different decision. We've had very little discussion of that, and it's not really, I don't know, maybe it's not primarily you, but I would like to see more discussion about a real honest-to-God assessment of what our full range of the legal as well as operational
We'd like
risk
to hear from the general
assessment.
manager, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Commissioner Wells, we were planning on doing that Monday.
Okay.
We're trying to set that up for Monday.
Great.
So with the precious
8
time
hours.
that we have left, maybe if we could get the risk information out and try to address those issues Monday.
It just occurs to me, though, that we've got some folks, I mean, you know, in the room who have got a lot of this experience as they've been presenting, and I just don't want to pass up them to be thinking about some of these things, too.
Well, I understand that. With all
Not
due
their
respect, they were asked to look at specific risk information, so
I
that
got
really
that.
wasn't in their purview.
I got that.
All right, please continue.
The process we have gone through,
I got a important.
Okay, I'm sorry, Commissioner Chase.
I just had an important question. Why the heck didn't we have these guys involved in the mediation? And is there an answer to that?
That'd be a.
I mean, we were going to make an offer to buy this thing. That's not a question for you, sir. I'm sorry, sir. But what? Because I don't know anything about this.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, to answer Commissioner Chase's question, of course, Commissioner Chase was involved in the mediation process as well. We certainly had legal involved in that. We had PFM or financial managers. We were looking at some qualitative risk at that time. We would have gotten to something like this as we went down the path where we might have had an offer that was acceptable to the other party. But as you recall, we never got to that point. So this would have been something that would have been done in that process. It's just that we didn't get far enough down the road.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Back to you, Mr. Painter.
the process we went through was straightforward. We started first with a qualitative assessment of risk. That's a fancy way of saying we sat down with the contract, the PPA, and examined the baseline analysis and the assumptions that were used, and we thought through our experience and identified the things that could turn out in the future different than what were being assumed in that baseline analysis, that could either reduce the benefit from the $203 million or could increase the benefit above that level. We included both. We identified every uncertainty that might impact it and reasoned through the kind of impact it would have, informed by the power purchase agreement. You do need to understand, I'm sure you do, that the existence of the power purchase agreement has a dramatic effect on the value of this plant to anyone that would buy it, either GRU or a third party. With the qualitative assessment, we identified the uncertainties in there that we thought should make the most difference in the benefits, to which the benefit should be most sensitive. So then we made alternative assumptions and calculated the sensitivity of those benefits. A sensitivity analysis is not a risk assessment. In other words, it just helps us see how much of a difference it makes so we can identify which are the variables that should be examined. It's really to identify the important variables, not to assess risk. Then, for each of those important variables, we described a range of assumptions and the probabilities that those ranges would occur. We consulted with ourselves. We consulted with PFM. We sought some input from the staff, okay, working independently all the way. And then we took all of those inputs and simulated the future with those ranges of inputs using a technique where we examined 100,000 possible realistic combinations of those inputs. And the output of that analysis is a risk profile, okay? And
Is that a literal number? Is that a literal number, 100,000?
100,000.
Thanks.
Okay, go ahead.
First, the risk assessments. This is the qualitative risk assessment, and I'm not going to take you through all the details unless you want to ask me to. I'll come back. I'll be happy to. But the important thing was that I want to communicate in the first pass is that we considered the broadest range of uncertainties. Okay. Then the color coding has to do with the ones we decided the benefits may be most sensitive to. The black color-coded ones we identified as uncertainties that would impact the ownership option and the PPA option, the continuing in your present PPA, almost the same, so that they won't, the benefits aren't that sensitive to it. The green we identified as the green things had to do with uncertainties that could reduce, could actually increase the benefits a little bit, but we didn't anticipate would be very material. Okay, so we went through that kind of a process. It's important, I've heard several things said over the last couple of days that, boil down to confusion. And it's understandable that there would be confusion. But it's important to understand that the things on this particular chart would impact your cost of the biomass facility roughly the same, almost the same, under the PPA and under ownership. So they don't really, the benefits of the benefits aren't particularly sensitive to these factors. One is any investments or any other type of cost that relate to changes in law that are pointed toward power plants. You have that risk under the PPA, and you would have it as an owner of the facility. This could be a major new environmental regulation, for instance. Okay? It could be a new noise ordinance. Okay. You have it under the under the PPA, you have it under the ownership. So it doesn't affect the benefits. Another one is, notice that prevailing biomass price levels, the fuel price levels for biomass, is on that list. That prevailing price level affects your costs under the PPA. The owner didn't take fuel risk. You have that risk. So if prevailing biomass fuel costs go up by 5% per year instead of 2.5% per year, your costs go up more under the PPA, just like they would under the ownership scenario. And I heard a sensitivity done that mentioned, well, if fuel cost went up more than we anticipate, it would dramatically affect the benefits of the project. We don't agree with that. It would not. In fact, there's some provisions of the contract that means you would be a little bit less affected under the ownership scenario than you would be under the PPA scenario. Okay. Emissions policies. We all worry about carbon taxes and other forms of emission policies. Those would impact you to very similar extents under the PPA and ownership. So as I've been frankly thrilled to see the amount of emotional and mental energy that you as a group are putting into this decision. Those are some uncertainties that you can spend less time on because they don't impact the benefits and the rationale for doing this or not doing it. That's what I want to communicate.
Why didn't we start with this stuff? Why didn't we start? That's a good question.
In order to perform this kind of an analysis, you necessarily have to make some basic structural, I'll call them, assumptions, if you will, that you're not going to vary in the analysis. You're going to handle, they may be uncertain, but you're going to handle those outside of the probabilistic analysis. You're going to assess those differently. Not that you're going to forget about them. Okay. So we started out by focusing on one purchase price scenario. We didn't choose that scenario because we believe it's the right price to offer. We didn't choose it because to try to give any message. We just chose it as a starting place. And then it's easy, and I'll tell you later, how different price scenarios might impact the analysis that we've done. Okay? Same with the 1603 grant. I've heard tremendous concern about that structure. We assumed it, but it's easy to adjust the analysis, and by the time you're ready to make a proposal, you will know you will make a decision about the price. You will make a decision about whether to pursue the grant. Those won't be as uncertain as they are now, but those are handled in a different way in this kind of an analysis. We assume the new co-structure is implemented. The only thing that does is add a little bit of uncertainty to the cost under the ownership scenario. So it actually shows a little bit more uncertainty. It doesn't dramatically affect what I'm going to show you. Okay. We assume the plant would be appropriately constructed to, I'll call it normal standards. Okay. Now, I heard a lot of concern about that you might be thinking of buying a pig in a poke to put it in a.
Yeah, Mike, pause. There's a conversation going on right now. Mr. Washington, if y'all need to talk, please step outside so that we can hear, okay? Thank you.
Incredibly rude.
We understand, Commissioner, and it has been addressed. Okay, go ahead.
It's not that we're ignoring that there might be an issue there, but the way a transaction like this would be done is you would assume that the plan is well constructed, decently constructed according to normal engineering standards. You would assume that it's meeting all of its permits. You would construct your offer and make it contingent on a due diligence process that allowed you a good chance of confirming or finding out that that's not the case before you purchase the asset. little bit like a pre-purchase, I'm a pilot. I do pre-purchase inspections on any airplane you buy. You do a pre-purchase inspection, if you're smart, on any used car you buy, et cetera. So you would do a very thorough pre-purchase inspection with the proper talent. So starting at this point of the investigation, you assume it's right, and then you go about verifying it. You build into your offer contingencies and how you deal with it if you find some deficiency that has to be corrected. Okay? We assumed, for simplification, that GRU operating cost would be in full blossom, if you will, day one. In other words, I heard a mention, well, what about the current operating contract, and what's going to be involved in canceling that or redoing it or reestablishing it? We don't know that right now. That information at least is not available to us, but you will know it before you enter in a contract to buy that plan, and you can take it into account in due time. We assume that not the GRU, but GREC receives the 1603 grant. Everything that we've heard so far is there's very, very low probability that they won't get that grant. There's some uncertainty maybe about the level, but that's only important to us for our analysis right now because there's a provision in the PA that says if they don't get that grant, there's a higher non-fuel energy payment that you have to make. And if we assume they didn't get it, then we would have to boost up that part of the revenue, and that would produce a higher level of benefit to buying it than the analysis we've done.
Mm-hmm.
With those structural considerations in place, we then started with the baseline assumptions. These are the same assumptions that were used in producing the $203 million estimate of net present worth benefits that was calculated by the PMM model. We simply use those same, like interest rate, they use 4.8% for tax-exempt debt, 5.3% for taxable debt, et cetera. We went through all of those and we verified that we could produce the same $203 million. And that gave us our starting point around which we built the uncertainty of the variables. Then we did the sensitivity analysis. The sensitivity analysis, again, is not a risk analysis. It's just to hone in on what we think are the most important factors.
Let me ask you, we don't have this as our backup on
Can we get
file,
all of
right?
this?
Because this is real fine print here that I can't read off
In fact,
of.
I'd be happy to copy them right now.
Yeah. Do we have backup copies that we could make available?
Or electronic email, can you email them to us?
I'm sure they can be emailed to you.
We don't have copies with us, but we can get them to you.
Yeah,
We only brought one copy to the meeting tonight? Okay.
Yeah, at the moment, I have just one copy.
Okay.
The important thing here, and I'll come back to this and hone in on any part of it.
I would say who's running our screen back there, when he points a finger at one section, really zoom in on that.
Or just give us the rectangle, because it'll be more readable.
Yeah, you can.
We don't need the
you can
heading.
go in further. You don't need the heading.
Thank you.
What we're showing here is the yellow line that I'm pointing to right here is the baseline assumption. Okay? And then we tested alternative assumptions, not because we think they're better, just to see how much it impacted. We found that bond interest rates the deal is sensitive to bond interest rates. We found that it's sensitive to the availability factor of the plant, the dependable capacity rating of the plant. We've talked about O&M and this allowance for major improvements and repairs. In your baseline assumptions, you're assuming $9 million a year for fixed O&M. $3 million a year for major renewals and replacements and repairs, and then additional O&M for consumables, variable O&M. We considered the variations in those things and found that it's fairly sensitive to that. We've focused on the escalation rate on those labor and materials. The deal is the benefit would be sensitive to that because the fixed O&M charge in the PPA is truly levelized over the 30 years. You're going to start out at a lower actual cost of O&M and insurance and these renewals and replacements, generically called. But over time, they're going to escalate. And if they escalate at higher than the 2.5% that's been assumed?
Yes, you're right. I'm
Because they
sorry.
can hear it all in the back.
Right now, there are far
Really
too many
apologize.
conversations going on inside this auditorium. We have one speaker, Mr. Painter. If there's any further sidebars, they must go to the auditorium.
Where they can hear this.
Or out in the lobby. Go outside.
That's what I meant. I'm sorry. This is the auditorium. Out into the lobby for further communication. Please show respect for the speaker. We're trying to get through this right now. No more sidebars, period. Mr. Painter.
What we found through this is we identified and we tested some variables that had very little impact. We identified the most sensitive variables, which I'm going to identify for you on a clearer, bigger printed chart. And we recognized that the baseline assumptions were within the ranges of those assumptions that we thought should be reasonably considered, except in one case, and that is on the fuel side. The baseline assumptions assumed that the fuel cost under the PPA would be identical, or the fuel cost under the ownership scenario would be identical to the fuel cost under the PPA. And when we assessed it, we anticipate that the fuel cost under GRU ownership would be lower than the fuel payments you would make under the PPA. So we attached an additional benefit to you bearing actual fuel cost instead of making the fuel cost payments that are provided for by the PPA.
Do you have a question? All right, we have a question on that last slide.
Just because, is that, so you're saying basically that there's, so GREC has profit built in to the, well, we're paying them, but they're paying somebody else?
The way the formulas work in the PPA, there'll be a margin above their actual fuel cost. It could turn out about the same, but it could turn out to be a margin. And so we've calculated the possibility. You're so far in the numbers you've been provided, there's been the assumption that the two would be the same, and that's a conservative assumption, a good assumption to make for the baseline case.
And could we, okay. That's all right, we're assuming that we're assuming that we would assume the fuel contracts, and then, so whatever they are, that they would be, so that's the same, but then there could be an increase beyond that after it gets to.
Well, what we're saying is that the PPA has a formula that converts the cost of fuel to dollars per megawatt hour charge that you pay under the PPA. And we're saying that can result in the charge being higher than the actual cost of fuel at any time.
Oh, higher, if we own it.
So therefore, there's some additional benefit.
We have some confusion here. Clarify that.
Under the PPA, the charge for fuel can be higher.
That we're contracted to pay.
That you're contracted to pay can be a bit higher than the actual cost of fuel. If you own the plant, you'll bear the actual cost of fuel.
And that's absent contract. You don't have access to the contracts as under our current information status.
I've reviewed we've reviewed the latest versions of the contract.
Of the PPA, not of the fuel contract.
I meant the fuel
Right,
contract.
PPA, not fuel contracts, right.
The Commission may remember this slide that we showed 2 weeks ago. identifying the factors that are plugged into this formula and recognizing that the both heat rate and the heating value of the fuel are calculated or contracted rather than being actual, so that what we felt a couple of weeks ago was that there's some hidden value in here. And with the help of Mr. Painter and Front, we have found that it looks like there's more opportunity in here than we had even envisioned at that point in time, and we're prepared to talk about that in a little bit more detail and about those contracts a little later.
All right, go ahead, Mr. Painter.
So again, the purpose of the sensitivity analysis was to really separate these uncertainties and narrow them down so that you could focus on the things that really matter rather than so many things that don't really matter, okay? Then we performed our probabilistic analysis. And again, what the model does, it calculates the annual cost over the 30 years for under the PPA. Using consistent assumptions, it calculates the annual cost under GRU ownership, calculates the difference, attributes that to benefit. And it does that, it picks one set of consistent assumptions, does the calculation, stores the result, does it 100,000 times, and then presents that to you as, here's your probable range of benefits, okay? When you do that calculation for the case that we chose to use as our baseline, you get a probability distribution function. And this is a good method to use to start to understand your risk and to make good decisions about any kind of a power supply decision. And really the importance of this is to show you the sort of salmon-colored area is the risk that the benefits would be lower than the baseline set of assumptions. The blue area is the potential that the benefits would be higher than under the baseline assumptions as we sit here today. Okay. The benefits chart that I just showed you is really the difference between two curves that describe the cost under the PPA and the cost under GRU ownership. The curve to the right, the axis along the bottom in both of these charts is millions of dollars. I should explain a little bit more. I'm sorry. I'm so used to these and I kind of forget to explain them a little bit. The axis along the bottom is in millions of dollars. This dividing line between the two colors is approximately $203 million. That's the baseline set of assumptions. The vertical axis is the probability that any sets of outcomes would occur. Okay? When you total up all the probabilities to the right of that line, you're somewhere in the 80 to 90% of the probabilities. So it's saying that there's a, I wouldn't quote that number, if you will, but I would say what the value of this is that there's a significantly higher probability that the benefits of GRU ownership would be higher than calculated under the one set of assumptions called the baseline assumptions. The area to the left has to do with the risk, and that's really the risk that it would be lower than the baseline set of assumptions. So I asked you to, we made one set of assumptions about purchase price and structure and that sort of thing. If you could imagine with me that we had instead made a different assumption about purchase price, this whole curve would move left or right as you adjust the purchase price. The whole curve would move left or right as you would determine whether you go forward with the 1603 grant. Okay? So those kind of uncertainties will go back and forth. Okay? The real reason to do this is because it gives you, there's just so many things going around in your mind about uncertainty. It starts to help you understand the extent of that uncertainty. And it's also important in structuring the deal, because once you've done something like this, the next use you put of it is you start asking yourself, what's that downside? Where's it coming from, and how can I manage that risk? Okay? It's for those two purposes. Theoretically, if it was shifted toward the zero axis, the closer and closer it gets to the zero axis, the less chance there will be benefits and the more chance that you could incur higher cost. Okay? The benefits curve, if you will, is really the difference between these two cost curves. The curve on the right is what your cost would be under the PPA. The curve on the left is what your cost would be under GRU ownership. Now,
Probability of variety of actual outcomes.
yeah, ranges with some probabilities. And your business sense, your personal sense, I've listened, has been exactly right. You've sat there and said, my God, there's so much uncertainty if we own this plant. Okay. Well, that's why it's fat. Okay. There is more uncertainty if you own this plant. That's why it's fat. And that's why when you ask me to go project the cost if I own the plant, there is more uncertainty. This shows a much narrower band. It's squeezed together. That's exactly saying there's a lot less uncertainty. And that's because a huge portion of your costs are fixed by the contract. You pay this much times the available energy from that plant, whether you choose to schedule it or not is another question, but you pay that much times the available energy. And that's why the curve has a lot less uncertainty in it. Your intuition is right. Owning it, there's a lot more uncertainty. But if the price is such that that curve is well to the left of the ownership curve, then it's an important difference, and you can have a greater level of confidence that you're making the right decision, and as you go forward into the future, you should have a lower cost situation under a very broad range of power supply options.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes, Commissioner.
and that's a lifetime net present value cost? The numbers that we see down
The
here?
X's across the bottom is the cumulative present worth of the cost over 30 years. And I should say one more thing. Both of these curves are actually a little bit, they're fatter. But for instance, we haven't varied the absolute level of fuel price on either curve. And that's because the amount of variation on both sides would be about the same. It'd be very close to the same. So the benefits, we've included the variables in here to which the benefits are sensitive. The uncertainty of what your cost would be, cumulative present worth over a 30-year period, is even greater when you add in that there's some uncertainty as to what the prevailing price level for biomass fuel might be over 30 years. Okay. Another example is environmental laws. Those will affect you essentially the same under both scenarios. So we haven't factored those uncertainties. Though if you did, and for some work we do, you need to do that. But if you did, it would make the curves fatter, but it wouldn't change the benefits curve. The benefits curve would be almost the same. So we haven't considered those.
A quick question.
Follow-up question from Commissioner. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just trying to think how to phrase it. So, all else aside, you're using the assumption of $203 or $203 million is the net present value over a 30-year period. So I guess, I don't know if it would be accurate to say 6.4 million a year. That's not actually the number because it's reflected by actual year dollars, but if you thought of this as you're making an attempt to purchase that much value, which is amounts to what you're doing here, and there's a certain transactional cost involved, beyond the risk question, just the transactional cost, is there a way for you to say to us, gosh, that looks like something that is worth pursuing or not, based on the difference between what we're ultimately trying to get out of it proportional to the scope of the total deal? Because 200 million net present value may be a lot, or it may not be much, depending on the overall scale of what you're trying to do. And it may be a really good deal or not really good deal based on how much expense and risk you have to go to in order to get it. Do you see where I'm getting with that question is? It's sort of one scale removed from the bottom line of here's 200 million, here's the probability. Some deals you just wouldn't go after if you looked at them on the scale of the overall project, and it just didn't seem that that was worth pursuing. You'd spend your time and your transactional value on something else. Is there any way for you to look at this and ultimately give us that kind of a evaluation of what we're going after?
Well, there's a lot to be more to be done over the next couple of weeks in understanding this and fashioning a proposal. But I would say to you that if you had a picture of benefits that that you had a high probability of achieving substantial benefits, then unless there's some downsides in terms of impacts on your financials or whatever that would cost you in a different way, then you would try to do it to lower the cost of a high-cost resource.
And there's no question in your mind that that's where we're at today compared to maybe where we might have been. You didn't look at this project any other time.
I did not.
Just going to note that it was not within the scope of Enfront's work to do an assessment on the impact to the balance sheet of GRU from any given level of debt.
There's outside factors. Those are all exogenous to the model.
Yeah, that we kind of, our charge was tell us if our assumptions are on the
economics
conservative side.
101, I think.
And PFM focused on, the balance sheet risk and some other things. But
yeah, I think that's inherent in the question. I know a lot of our talk yesterday, you'll recall, looked at what is and is not significant. Use the word again just now. And we tried to do it in the context of a theoretical 1,000 kilowatt user, but to be honest with you, I don't find that terribly helpful. I respect why it's being done because we're trying to think, well, what is an actual customer, citizen going to be looking at on their bill, and is that enough to make it worth our taking this challenge on? But for me, it's much more significant to try to figure out what the dollar amount in millions per year is in the context of the size of the electric utility.
if it'll ultimately depend on the structure of whether the grant's available and the purchase price and whatnot. But I would just note the staff has tried to be conservative, and they have been, and the analysis done of the rate impacts have been based on those conservative assessments. So there is uncertainty, and there are significant chances that the beneficial rate impacts would be even larger. That's what this is saying.
And I totally see that. But when I look at the 120 or 112 or whatever the grant amount is as being effectively 50% of the potential net present value. Now, to me, that just stands out as a red flag for me, given what I've already heard and what I've already felt about my concern about that structure. Because your assumptions are all based on NUCO and getting that grant and keeping that grant.
If you don't get the grant, yesterday it was said that the present worth benefits would go down less than the 120 million. And,
Right.
and that's our assessment too.
So we need to look at this probably with a shift to reflect that possibility that we seem to be building in, to see if we're still comfortable with because it looks like there's potential we'd still be comfortable possibly with that risk profile, but it does look a lot less viable, particularly if you consider that we're only making an offer that they can then go shop around to people who presumably have no problem guaranteeing that grant.
Right. And key is that once GREC has the grant, which everyone expects them to have, then most of the third parties that might buy it would have access to that and wouldn't cause a clawback of the grant. So they're going to be starting from the grant stays.
In their definition of whether or not we've met the requirement of having the superior offer will also be that word onerous, no less onerous. They're looking at us promising that that grant won't be clawed back. I would strike me that they would say they would discount whatever number we put in there for that 120 to reflect that reality.
And you're right to use conservative assumptions, and you're right to think about this curve shifting to the left if you choose not to go forward with the grant, or if you're unable to get the grant in another way, or if you choose to think about a difference in purchase price. And interest rates. Interest rates, if they're 0.5% higher than the baseline assumption, the curve goes to the left by $35 million, $40 million. If it's a 1% higher interest rate, it goes to the left $75 million.
That is one of those big factors.
To the left, toward.
And that's the chart. Can you go back to the chart that shows those so people will understand that? That's what this one means, right? This one with this line. The length of this line means more sensitivity, and if it's more to the downside, it's more to the downside, or the upside. Now, I see the fuel upside, believe me. I'm sure all of our friends watching see that too.
Okay. We have another question, Commissioner.
No, I'm fine. Yeah, no.
Commissioner Henson Ross.
It sounds like, based on your assumptions, the benefits far outweigh the risks.
Well, we don't know that yet until you wrestle with the purchase price and whatnot. But the potential that the benefits will be larger than the baseline, it's much larger than the potential that it would be less than the baseline. That's more what we would conclude, if you hear the difference.
The graph that you just showed us does show the benefits being greater than the risks.
Yes.
But that's just an assumption.
Well, it's a considered analysis for a wide range of benefits, a wide range of assumptions about variables that could impact the benefits.
So I'm trying to figure out, so when you look at probability, it's highly probable that it's more beneficial. Yeah. So based on your experience, and I think you said you had an accumulated number of how many years?
Well, we're all getting pretty gray.
Yeah.
We all 25 to 40
and I mean,
years.
and it's you and other people, right?
Yes.
Based on that knowledge that you have and however many power plants you've seen, what would you estimate the cost of this plant to be?
He might not make that.
The cost of building it?
The cost of building it, and now what is its value?
I'd rather not say what I think the value is,
Because,
I haven't completed an analysis of value. This is focused on how, the difference to you, understand that the
I'm
value.
not talking about analysis, I'm talking about experience.
The value of the power plant is affected by the PPA. So what you would do to calculate a value, you would consider all of the same kind of assumptions about the way a third party would finance it and all the uncertainties they would consider, and you would deduce a value that they'd be willing to pay.
Yes, sir. And I know you're saying everything you're supposed to say. So I'm saying, if you walked into a house right now and you were a realtor, and you walk around and you see what's in it, and you could make some assumptions about how much this thing is worth.
Right. Closer analogy, that's a good analogy. But if you walked into a commercial property and it had a 30-year lease under a particular term, you look at the property, but then you look at the lease, and the value of it is the sum of the two, right?
And
It's or maybe the higher of the two.
So that PPA, again, is controlling
Yes, ma'am.
everything.
I don't want to put words in your mouth, but it sounds almost like what you're getting at is the reason the benefits may look better than the risk under a purchase profile is because of the risks under the existing PPA are so high that by comparison.
Well,
Not the risk.
the payments are fixed, and I use the term risk, and I think it's used to, risk is really the chance and the amount by which something can turn out different than you budgeted or expected, right? And
I'm sorry, were you concluded? I didn't mean to.
No, but that's okay.
And
I was just, okay.
this graph shows that
Yeah, I got it.
there's not nearly so much risk involved in the PPA because so much of it is predetermined.
Because it's fixed. So let me help myself.
Yeah, go ahead.
Let me help myself, and then you tell me have I helped myself. It's like, I have to go back to the house analogy. It's like having a 30-year fixed mortgage, and you already know what to expect. Then the savings you could have if you went with a variable, all these designer type mortgages. The risks are much greater because it's not fixed.
Give you a real-life example.
Yes.
I bought a condominium when I
Oh,
graduated.
you mean a real life
Real
example?
As a young fledgling
son did
thing,
that.
I bought a condominium at times when interest rates were 16%. I slept on the pavement all night to qualify for a special loan, which I got at 12%. It was assumable without qualification.
Which is not.
If I sold it within 11 months. That doesn't happen anymore. I sold it and I earned about an 80% return in 11 months because in the interim, interest rates had gone up even more, and the gentleman that was moving from California to Orlando said, that doesn't look too expensive to me.
Well, coming from California.
Right, and he said, you've got a great mortgage that I can assume. That'll save me a lot of money. So he paid a very substantial premium over what otherwise would have been the market value. The PPA, I think Mr. Stanton has said it very well. The PPA includes a lot of fixed charges. They've assumed a lot of risks, and they've made sure that they've covered those risks very well.
And if we buy it, we can buy ourselves out of it.
Or into it.
Or we can restructure a lot of things if we own it. Yes?
And manage those risks yourself.
Exactly.
Before I take you to the next list, we're at 10:54. Our meetings are supposed to adjourn at 11. We'll have to extend the meeting and, or provide some other direction. Commissioners, what's your pleasure?
That was actually why I chimed in.
Okay.
So my statement, Mr. Mayor, we've received a lot of information over the last 2 days. This seems like a natural break point. So I am not going to be voting to continue the meeting when we get to that point. I don't know if I'm the only one or not.
Well, I have Commissioner Chase, I think, has some questions relative, and I would
Mr.
say what
Mayor,
we should do at the minimum is
Wrap things.
focus on questions to get us to Monday.
Well,
Mr. Mayor, as a point
if I may,
Yes.
we have one other consultant with us to talk about the engineering and design and reliability of the unit and the cost of it, the other side of the equation, from Burns & McDonnell, who has, if you wish to hear him, just want to consider that he won't be available after, easily available after the next period of time. So, for your consideration.
All right.
You won't be here Monday? Is that what I'm hearing?
Well, we would have to fly him back in from Kansas City. It can be done. I don't know what his commitments are to other projects.
But what is it he has to tell us that's so valuable?
The questions that the commission has had regarding some of the risks, they fall into a couple of different categories, and Mr. Painter's addressed one of them. Some of the other risks that been expressed concerns are the reliability of the unit, and which we have our own opinion on, and I'll briefly say that this is an unproven technology that's been said is entirely untrue. Every piece in that plant is a building block standard part that's been used in power plants all over the world multiple times, not to spend part of the time going into that, but this gentleman has done due diligence on many acquisitions and is manager of a development, project development group that does the assessment on all variable O&M, fixed O&M, all the rest of those kinds of costs. So we had him do an independent look at, well, how far off base or on base are we on our assessment of what those costs would be. So that's what he would be here to provide.
Mr. Mayor, let me ask you, how long would you need to share that information with us, sir? Who am I looking at?
We don't even know who we're looking at. Who's it?
Meeting all kinds of new people.
Jeff Kopp from Burns & McDonnell, and I think probably 15 minutes, something
Okay,
like
and
that.
So I'm wondering, for questions and stuff, because we can send our questions in via email, and we just copy the commission on, send them to the general manager, he can farm them out to whoever needs to get them, and then those answers can come back to us on Monday. So I guess I'll make a motion right now to extend the meeting till 11:15.
Second.
Okay, we have a
I
motion.
motion to waive the rules, sorry, Mr. Clerk.
Send the meeting 11:15. Any discussion of the motion? Commissioner Chase?
Yeah, I just, it's such a long day, I'm so tired too, but just, I'll support this if you guys would support listening to our citizens at least once the next time. I mean, it's stunning. Thank you.
Right, it's safe to say, if we stop at 11:15, we receive no citizen feedback, no citizen input at this time, and is everyone comfortable with that?
I feel highly confident that folks in this room will share their opinions with us.
And I would actually ask them to submit it in writing too, because a lot of what we've heard recently from our citizens would be valuable if we got the presentations that they've often shown us, because then I can actually have it in hand. I mean, I'm not discounting at all. I think their input would be valuable in writing.
Did we vote to extend the meeting?
All right, well, we
Not yet.
have a
This is kind of a
motion
debate on that
and a
topic.
second, and we're going
Is
to go
that
ahead
debatable?
and call for a vote on the motion. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries, means extended to 11:15. Commissioner Chase, though, before we go to our Kansas City guy, Commissioner Chase had his light on for Mr. Painter.
So, I mean, my biggest question is, will Mr. Painter be back here on Monday? Because that's, I was going to wrap up at 11 and agree with everybody. So, will Mr. Painter be here Monday?
We have not currently made the arrangements. I don't know if John is available or not.
And I would just quickly add, for our Kansas City person, would he be available by conference call, if not by in person? Because we did that with Oric, and the technology worked well. So he could be, so in other words, okay.
Skype?
So I would just,
Have a face up there.
Sidebars?
I'm going to, I'll save all my hard questions for next week, but I've got a couple basic ones. were the other charter officers involved with this firm or selecting this firm? Have they seen any of this stuff prior to today? The other charter officers that we asked to be part of this, have they seen these slideshows or anything?
Mr.
Or
Mayor.
had any discussions about it prior to today?
Okay.
I'll try to answer Commissioner Chase's question. As we've said earlier, this information is being developed virtually as you speak, so it's constantly being revised. I had a call early this week with the charter group. They have been on other calls where Mr. Painter and the Burns and Mac representatives have been on the phone. They have talked about some of these issues. I don't think they saw this specific information as, just for example, with Mr. Painter and Mr. Davis.
Mr. General Manager, just yesterday's fine, and it sounds like sort of yes, and that's fine. I'm not trying to.
We need his 15
Yeah.
minutes.
Yeah, there you go. Thank you. I would like the opportunity to, so all I got to say is that I am obviously exhausted like the rest of us, but I am absolutely stunned to see your curves for the first time, that you just happen to have them, used them before, and then to see them filled out with his presentation. And I just got to tell you, I don't know what to make of it. I don't know this gentleman. He seems like he's got a good background. I don't know anything about him. Big decision. I don't know who we're supposed to ultimately listen to, but it's just with everything we've been through, and I'll follow up on Monday, but it's whatever, pick a word. That's why I asked you, is where'd that come from? And when you popped that chart out, wow. Thank you.
Okay.
The curves I showed were just, an academic, that's the way you usually go through these kinds of things, which is a similar system that Mr. Painter's company uses. I'll introduce Jeff Kopp from Burns & McDonnell. Burns & McDonnell, very briefly, one of the major engineering and architect engineering firms servicing the power industry, and in fact was the design engineer of the South Energy Center. I think all of you have been through the South Energy Center, so is an example of the kind of work that they're capable of doing.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Jeff Kopp with Burns & McDonnell, and I'm going to go through some of the inputs that we were asked to look at as part of the analysis, and just kind of, I'll keep this brief since I know it's getting late here. But we were asked to look at a few of the inputs to the model, starting with availability factor and reliability of the facility. I guess first I'll start with the design of the facility and our expectations of whether or not this is industry standard type design. Mezzo boiler is being used at this facility. Mezzo has over 200 boilers installed in the world, over 100 fluidized bed boilers, which is the type of boiler that we're looking at here. Over a dozen woody biomass boilers that use this same bubbling fluidized bed technology installed in the world. So that it is a proven industry standard type technology that we would anticipate to be proven technology, I guess is how we would define that. The steam turbine that's being used is a Siemens steam turbine. I don't have any specific statistics on that, but again, industry standard type technology. And then lastly, the other critical item there is the material handling system for fuel handling for the woody biomass. It has been designed and installed by Wolf, who is, we would consider them a qualified contractor to install any kind of material handling system, and they really actually have carved out a niche in the woody biomass world for material handling. So as far as the technology that's installed there, we're comfortable with that as being proven technology provided by qualified vendors. So then rolling that into how that translates into our expected availability factor, our engineers looked at that, and I guess let me first give a little bit of background and kind of some of the projects that we've done in the past and how we develop some of these numbers. I manage our project development group that develops new power generating facilities. So it's very common for us on the front end of developing these facilities to evaluate different technologies and look at the costs of those technologies going forward and evaluate the economics to determine what type of technology fits in that particular scenario. So we typically look at construction costs, we look at variable and fixed O&M costs, and so we've developed in-house a lot of these types of analyses. We've also done numerous due diligence projects out of my group as well. I've managed due diligence evaluations for 40 to 50 facilities that have been evaluated for purchase by some of our clients. So based on the in-house developed numbers as well as, values we've seen as part of due diligence evaluations, we typically, look at those O&M costs and opine on the reasonableness of those projections going forward. We look at historical operating costs. So we've seen a number of actual operating costs on facilities based on that experience and availability. So the way that we looked at availability here was we pulled information from the Generator Availability Data System, commonly known as GADS, where operating plants report their actual availability. And our engineering staff looked at GADS data for wood-fueled biomass boilers with outputs of less than 200 megawatts that were operational from 1990 to 2013, and looked at the availability factor actually reported for those facilities, and it was approximately 86.6%, with a forced outage rate of approximately 3.5%. So we looked at how that related to the GREC facility. The majority of the facilities that were in that analysis that resulted in the 86.6% were Stoker-fired boilers, where we would anticipate that those would have more maintenance downtime for their planned maintenance outages because there's more maintenance required with those.
Mr. Mayor, Stoker.
Okay.
What is that?
Yeah, go ahead and clarify that was a Stoker.
What is Stoker?
Oh, I'm
What's a
sorry.
Stoker?
Yeah. So we're looking at a fluidized bed type boiler. A Stoker boiler is another type of boiler.
Okay.
And it was more common historically. A lot of those were built in the 80s. So this data set contains a lot of those 80s vintage Stoker boilers that require substantially more maintenance for planned outages. So we would estimate that they would typically take a 4-week planned outage. We would typically estimate that a fluidized bed that has a less of a planned outage would be able to be reduced to more like 2 weeks. So backing out that 2 weeks of planned outage rate, we would expect that you could achieve an availability rate of 90% or higher. So we estimated that 90% is a reasonable planning number to use for availability factor. The other thing that we didn't take into account that would be, again, potential upside is that a lot of these boilers, like I said, are 80s vintage boilers that are in this data set. This is newer technology, or this is a newer boiler. We would expect less forced outages as well. So we did not specifically back that out, but again, we see some potential upside on that. The next input that we were asked to evaluate was the operating and maintenance costs. So we did pull together quickly a fixed and variable and capital plan for the facility going forward, just based on
Focus.
our in-house data and our anticipation for what these costs would be.
We need focus on that. There we go.
Much better. I thought it was just me because I was tired.
Mr. Washington, you're a better
Kind of
door
in
than
the
a
way.
window.
So based on this analysis, our group that prepares all of our O&M estimates for evaluation of facilities, I worked with them to put these costs together, and they came up with a fixed O&M cost of approximately $10.7 million. Variable costs that are in there are pretty much just consumables for water and consumables, and then disposal of ash and bed material replacement costs that has to be performed over time. And then lastly, we looked at the annual capital projections based on replacing the SCR, that's the selective catalytic reduction, the catalyst in the SCR. And within the bag house, the bags have to be replaced every once in a while as well. So we put in costs for those, and then kind of an other capital expenditures that'll be other miscellaneous fuel handling equipment, rolling stock, things like that that you would need to replace over time, or not rolling stock, but dozers or things like that that you may have to replace over time.
And these numbers, our fixed O&M is slightly lower, we're using 10. And then the capital, I think I heard you say 3.
That's correct. In Burns McDonald's independent look at it, they came out with a slightly higher fixed O&M. They came out with I would say, significantly lower variable O&M, and that's something we'll be taking a look at over the next couple of weeks to see that they may have seen something in there that we missed, and we were pretty close on the capital.
You were 3 on your capital number.
On the variable O&M, well, on the capital, and we were about double or more on the variable O&M, so there may be some potential that we overlooked at our consultants.
And we have another question.
So
Commissioner Henson-Ross.
You did the studies on the reliability of the equipment?
We studied, we basically benchmarked it against the industry and looked at what's kind of the industry standard for woody biomass boilers.
Do you have any reports on these pieces of equipment and their noise factor?
I was going to ask that.
We did not evaluate that as part of this analysis. I don't personally have them in my possession right now.
I meant, but you've compared equipment and you know the names of them and what their percentages of operations are. You don't know about their noise?
No, that's part of facility design that I haven't been tasked with evaluating, so no, I do not know.
Is that because we didn't ask you to, or because it's just not something you analyze?
Noise is definitely not my area of expertise, but I would say that typically the vendors guarantee a number, and we would specify as part of a facility design a guarantee level that we would expect them to meet.
So if we ask you...
We didn't do that in our PPA, did we?
Not in the PPA, but did we ask him to, we didn't ask him to evaluate that?
In his evaluation.
In his evaluation, we didn't ask you to evaluate that. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I didn't do anything in my evaluation regarding noise.
But you are, your program, your company has the capacity to do that.
We would need some very specific details about the facility to do that. We couldn't just say a Mezzo boiler has this noise level. Mezzo could guarantee you noise levels at varying degrees. And it's not just the Mezzo boiler. I mean, it'd be specific pieces of equipment such as pumps, motors, things like that that would have not only noise levels but frequency ranges. It's a pretty detailed analysis to look at all those pieces of equipment. I've given you the reliability based on the major components of the facility.
I realize that, but I'm asking you now, do you have the capacity to give us that?
In other words, if we did a change order to the contract...
Yeah, we change your contract, could you give us that?
I don't believe so without getting some information from the vendors that I don't know that you would be privy to that information.
All right, thank you.
Commissioner Wells, and we got 3 minutes.
Okay.
Well, I just wanted to ask, I mean, I was thinking more about the material handling complex and whether or not what the norm is in other facilities covered or not, which has effects on operations, but also potentially noise. And then the second, I guess, was you seem to indicate that the norm is that the provider of these materials provide those kind of commitments, and so presumably GREC has those commitments in the contracts that they sign to do all this, and that would be something we could compare to with what numbers they're getting when they're doing the testing now.
I don't know. I may be straying a little outside of my area of expertise. I'm not a noise expert. That's really not.
Thank you. I'm sorry.
I can't, I know that GREC will be requiring all of the performance testing on the equipment to meet all the requirements, both of the permit levels and of the contracts from some of the factors that are not regulatory, they're just contractual.
Right.
So
But like factors like a covered,
they're going through that now. That's this testing period.
like a covered material handling area as opposed to an open one?
Well, I'm not sure I follow the question there. They have a covered conveyor belts and an open pile, and So I'm not sure I understand the question.
Okay.
I apologize.
We're almost out of time.
Sorry, yeah, I know.
Thank you for your presentation, and you will be available by phone. All right, did you have more?
Ran out of time. But you would be available by phone on Monday.
I know.
No,
Okay.
well, go
And let me
Wildcats.
ask you, did you have other slides that you had prepared that you can provide
Give
to
to
us?
Or your presentation.
No, I don't have any other slides, but this is going to be all documented in a written report.
Okay.
to-
Well, let me ask you, I mean, how long did you have this prepared? When did you finish this slide? And I guess same question for Mr. Parent, because it's usually we get, if this is a PowerPoint or something that we have access to, and to have it in the old-fashioned printout that you stick on the overhead is uncustomary.
If I may, as Mr. Hunsinger said, this is a work in progress right up to the last minute. Matter of fact, I was with Mr. Painter this afternoon, and the slide was being put together about 2:30, 3 o'clock this afternoon. And
Well, I
while
hope you can make it available to us, and I hope our charters, we hate to ask you to work over the weekend, but we hope you have a chance to look at this as well. And with that in mind, it is 11:15. This meeting is adjourned. See you all Monday.